Fight Block podcast is brought to you by Max Muscle Marin, makers of high-quality sports nutrition products and fully customized meal plans. You can reach them at facebook.com/maxmusclemarin or give them a call, 415-460-MAX with 2 X's.
All right, welcome to the Fight Block. My name is Jeremy. Once again joined by
Coop.
We're here to give a recap to UFC 152. Great night of fights all around, prelims and main card. Some good stuff. And we're going to touch on a few quick headlines, and then also we're going to close out the show with some quick predictions for the upcoming UFC on Fuel card. It's Stipe Miocic taking on Fuel Struve. So I believe there's 6 broadcasted fights on Fuel, so it'll be a good night of fights, good matchups. It's coming from Nottingham, England, and the crowd's always pretty into the fights there, so it should be an exciting night. But quick, just to start off, just going to mention what exactly Fight Block, what we have in mind for this thing. It's kind of a weird platform right now on YouTube. An hour-long show coming on. You click it, you see our video, you click on it. It's an hour-long show. We don't have any video going on right now. It's ideally supposed to be a podcast, but I'm working on trying to get the feed to work. I've created podcasts in the past and gotten all to work and RSS and all that stuff, but for some reason my account's not matching up. I can't get the files to upload, so in a little bit of a standstill, but eventually hoping to get this thing on iTunes where you can just subscribe, get the episode each week. And but yeah, so for now we're on YouTube, so appreciate those who are listening. We've had a few people stop by, drop their comments, and overall I think I'm satisfied so far with what we've got with which such little stuff that we're using Rock Band microphones plugged into a computer, and yeah, so pretty much we got a lot of room to grow. So just throwing that out there. But anyways, before we get started, just quick headlines in regards to Strikeforce. Frank Mir has pulled out of the fight with
Daniel Cormier.
Thank you. And that fight was supposed to be in November, I believe. And so now Daniel Cormier is waiting to, he's still booked for the card, but they're looking for a replacement opponent. Rumors have it that Andrei Arlovski is willing to step up.
Yeah, absolutely. And UFC actually apparently really was on the verge of having Tim Sylvia fight Daniel Cormier before Frank Mir had just said, you know what, I'll go over to Strikeforce, it's fine. So I wouldn't be surprised now that Arlovski kind of, no contested, more or less kind of thrashed Sylvia, that he gets the call. I think that matchup-wise, it's interesting. Obviously, rankings-wise, it doesn't make the most sense, but hey, if they were going to book Tim Sylvia initially, why not? Unless they want a different guy from the UFC to go over.
Yeah, because technically right now, Daniel Cormier is the only heavyweight they've got. I think pretty much after the Cormier fights, they're folding the heavyweight division. We should see Cormier in the UFC. I know he's mentioned that he's willing to drop down to light heavyweight and take on John Jones also.
Technically, Josh Barnett's still employed, and he's supposed to get one more fight to fulfill his Showtime contract before he gets brought over, but I don't think that they're going to rematch that initially, although excitement-wise, I don't think any of us would complain if they rebook that fight.
Yeah, no, they had a war. So, yeah, Cormier and Barnett are the only 2 heavyweights remaining in Strikeforce on contract, so it'll be interesting to see who they find as a replacement.
And
Cyborg? Oh.
She could fight as heavyweight, I feel like.
Yeah, okay. But yeah. So, and then also, unfortunately, Gilbert Melendez injured his shoulder in training, and he's out of the upcoming Strikeforce title fight with Pat Healy, and they once again have canceled a show for the second time under the Zuffa banner. So Strikeforce is canceled, and whether or not they reschedule the fight or when Melendez is healthy, what he's going to be doing, who knows? But yeah, upcoming Strikeforce card canceled, and once again, you got to deal with all the undercard fighters too that are missing out on their paychecks. That's a lot of upset fighters with that. So.
Well, the thing with that is also Strikeforce fighters have complained and, sometimes even requested releases from the company for not being able to fight often enough. Paul Daly was one of them. So, you're talking about Strikeforce. They don't have multiple shows or a guaranteed one a month. This is a company that is struggling to get its fighters enough fights, and so they allow them to compete in other organizations a lot of the time. So, this is, arguably bigger than UFC's cancellation, even though it's on a smaller scale and less people are going to kind of know about it. It's going to impact the fighters a lot more harshly.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, if they keep continuing continuing with that pattern, I mean, this could be the beginning of the end for Strikeforce. They've really lost a lot of their momentum. But moving on to UFC 152, quick recap, or actually, shouldn't say quick. We're going to go through each one of the main card fights, and it's going to take up most of our show. But, great fights to talk about, some solid finishes, and some exciting moments. Starting off the card, Cub Swanson defeated Charles Oliveira via KO in the first round. Actually, quite interesting KO.
One of the weirder knockouts you'll ever see.
Yeah, caught Oliveira with a good shot. Looked like Oliveira was going to try and shake it off, and next thing you know, his legs just give out, and he drops, and he's done. Ref steps in.
I don't think he was fully out, although Wikipedia will have you believe that it's an official KO. I think it's kind of a TKO. He's more dazed than anything. The lights are on, but nobody's home.
Yeah. The ref saw that he was done and, stepped in before Swanson could do anything to him on the ground. So pretty much I think that's why they're calling it KO. One punch, dropped him, and then ref stepped in.
But hey, how about Cub Swanson? 3-fight win streak. It shows you can teach a veteran old dog new tricks, and Greg Jackson's the man to do it.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, we both had Oliveira winning this fight by submission, so this is very impressive by Cub Swanson. And like we mentioned in our prediction show, really his only losses are to top contenders and legit fighters in
some of them may be very one-sided, but still, it's top guys.
Yeah. So I mean, Cub Swanson, man, right up there in title contention. And I know this was your idea, but for each one of these fights, we're going to kind of give out who we think the next matchup is for each, or for the mostly just the winning fighter. Who's next for them in terms of matchups. And I mean, Cub Swanson, like you said, three fights in a row. He's sitting right there, and I would say title contention. One more big win, he could,
Yeah, technically he should probably have like a gatekeeper fight before he gets a title fight, but to be honest with you, he's not an up-and-comer. He is an existing veteran, so I say let's throw him right in there. I don't think that he should be babied. I think that this will be a good measuring stick. Has he improved this much, or no, is he technically still like just a really high B-level guy? So there's two names that come to mind for me. One of them being Bart Pelashevsky. I think that would be an amazing fight. I think that would be fight of the night or knockout of the night written all over it. He could be thrown in there against somebody like Hatsu Hioki too, technically. Both those guys are on a big roll, just coming off just mild defeats. Although I know Joe Silva doesn't like to book guys who are coming off wins and losses together. But honestly, I mean, if I think that the best fight they could make is against Frankie Edgar. You have some of the other guys in the division kind of tied up right now. And I think that if they really want to kind of go forward with the Aldo versus Eric Koch idea when they're both ready, and Frankie Edgar's healthy right now, so let's, Swanson didn't take that much damage. Let's get this fight booked.
Yeah, those would be two great matchups. And, I could also throw in Korean Zombie's name in there, too. He's right up there.
Also, you just continuing, I'm thinking the theme of Swanson welcoming guys and playing spoiler to those dropping down to 145, because he did it with Pearson, and then he did it again with Oliveira. So why not, Edgar now? He's proved both other tests. Why not this one?
True. I know Bart Pawluzetsky, he's got a fight coming up with Diego Nunes. That's going to be on UFC FX 5. A winner of that fight would definitely be a good matchup, I'd say. Diego Nunes is also a solid fighter. He's on I believe he won his last fight. Let me see here. But he did lose to Kenny Florian, beat Manny Gambarian, which is a great win, but lost to Dennis Seaver. Looks like, is he dropping down also? Looks like lightweight, yeah. Dennis Seaver? No. Dennis Seaver?
Seaver's already dropped down.
Oh, Seaver's... Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's already down. He's already fought and won. He beat... I think he did beat Nunes, too.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm thinking... Okay, man, okay. I'm thinking... that's lightweight. I'm thinking... Okay, never mind. But yeah, the winner of that fight would be a great matchup.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So now, technically I wouldn't want to break that fight up because that's actually an amazing fight in of itself. Winner of that, winner of Cub Swanson, or Frankie Edgar, throw him to a wolf.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I did not know that Dennis Seaver dropped down to featherweight. I thought he was a pretty big lightweight.
He was thickly muscled. He was very short, kind of had the shirk thing going on. And also, you got to figure... Although Seaver experienced a lot of success, he also got a few kind of bad defeats at that weight too. So it's one of those things where could he still have had success there? Of course, but that division is so log jammed. Why not drop down to the relatively shallow 145?
True. So yeah, I mean, great win for Swanson, and definitely in there for contention with the title. If should he, beat a top contender, I think a Frankie Edgar matchup would be a good one. But yeah, moving on to the next fight, Matt Hamill against Roger Hollett. We pretty much predicted this fight. Both of us wasn't the most exciting. Went to judge's decision. Matt Hamill wins his return fight to the UFC. Not much to really say about this. I mean, Hamill. I mean, at least we saw him utilize some of his wrestling and ground and pound, although it still didn't look all that great.
No, I mean, honestly, you don't need to. If we were to rank each fight, watch it now, later, or never. Watch Cub Swanson and Charles Oliveira now. Just skip this one, and we're not going to waste time talking about it. Whatever reason Hollett pulled out of the first fight for, maybe it was because he just didn't think he was ready for this fight. That would be my guess, because he really didn't look like he was ready at all. I really didn't know that a guy with so much boxing experience would just throw so many arm punches that didn't make any sense. They weren't like Liddell arm punches either. They were just terrible. Skip it. I honestly don't really care if I ever see either guy fight again. I like Matt Hamill, but if he loses his next fight, I think it's time to go back to retirement.
Yeah, I mean, he was out for a year, and the ring rust kind of showed a little bit, and he didn't look all that explosive. But yeah, other than that, nothing too exciting to talk here about. So moving on, we're going to go on to Michael Bisping against Brian Stann. Fairly entertaining fight. Brian Stann was very close to winning this fight. I believe it was the first round. Right at the end, caught Bisping right on the temple, staggered Bisping, and Brian Stann went in for the kill, but wasn't able to finish. He got Bisping up against the cage. Bisping was able to grab hold and recover, but once Bisping went back to the corner, you could tell he didn't know what happened. He asked his corner what happened. They told him he got hit by a pretty good shot, and but Bisping, man, bounced back from that. Brian Stann had a really good takedown defense in the first round, stuffed a couple of the takedowns, looked good, but then Bisping came in the second, was able to get the takedowns, and that pretty much is what dictated this fight here, was Bisping's wrestling and getting Stann on his back. So Bisping looked, I would say, fairly impressive against a game Brian Stann that, didn't look too bad himself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is the kind of loss that looks pretty okay for Stann because, I said it before, Bisping's either really overrated by his fans and he's really underrated by just about everybody else. Everybody wants to hate him. He has done some pretty shitty things like spitting on George Rivera, for instance, after kind of just playing that whole fight, like, not really caring about the fact that he was fouling left and right either. But that's, just the start of a lot of things that he's said. He is amusing, though. I'll give him that. Even when he's kind of a jackass, it's still amusing. And he's one of the most underrated boxers in the sport. He has some great footwork. Every now and then he makes a really dumb mistake, and he pays for it. I wouldn't say he has a bad chin, although he was cold-cocked absolutely by Dan Henderson, because part of having a good chin is, being able to recover, too. And other than the one time, Bisping basically has recovered. The only other fight where he got tagged and didn't get knocked out, but he looked bad, was against Vanderlei. But I would say, Bisping, I don't think that this should be the fight that gets him a title fight, and I think Dana White's, kind of zigzagging around the question of the press conference shows, it wasn't an absolute definitive stoppage victory. So I think you'll see Bisping fight somebody else. I say, why not? Chris Weidman especially kind of has a little bit more of an impressive, at least momentum going right now. I say the winner of Boach and Weidman gets a title shot. I know the UFC is probably going to wait to see what happens with the George St. Pierre fight. So Anderson's kind of in limbo right now. I think, why not? Let's book Michael Bisping, who is on a win streak at that weight, against Vitor Belfort, who is on a win streak at 185 technically. The loss to John Jones, doesn't count at 185 at all. Let's book those guys together and see what happens. Let's, I don't see any other reason why not, although you could book Bisping against somebody like Alan Belcher, technically, although Belcher's been booked in a rematch against Yushin Okami, so I'm not sure that I really like the Belcher-Okami fight, but, I think Belfort-Bisping is a great matchup, and then Brian Stann, I think that one's, kind of written in stone right there as well. I think you give him the loser of the Hector Lombard fight, who's actually fighting, who's he fighting right now? I know the guy, but I forgot his name.
Hector Lombard is fighting. I'd have to look
that up. I'll give the other option that I'm going to say out. So the other option then is to have Brian Stann booked against the loser of the. Oh, it's Mark Munoz.
There you go.
So yeah, it's either Mark Munoz or Hector Lombard. Or what you could do is you can honestly just throw him right back in against one of the little bit higher ranked guys and throw him again against the loser.
Husmar Pahares.
Say that again?
Husmar Pahares. That's who they got as Lombard's next matchup.
Oh, okay. Well, Munoz is booked too now, actually, or he's supposed to be. No, excuse me. Munoz is the one who's not booked. So, yeah, the loser of Paul Harris and Lombard, or Mark Munoz, who currently does have an opponent at all, and that could present some interesting stylistic challenges for both guys. Munoz, the wrestling against Stan testing the chin of Munoz. I like that fight, and they're both coming off losses, so the winner kind of gets to the back of the line for a little bit, and the loser kind of bumps right back up there over a big name. In addition to that, you could theoretically book Stan against the loser of Boach and Weidman. That fight makes sense too. But I think the fight that makes the most sense, that's a little bit more of a surefire win for Stan, and kind of more relevant to his standing in the division, is going to be the loser of Paul Harris and Lombard. And either way, that fight is fireworks written all over it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree. I think a Munoz-Brian Stan fight would make sense, but, that'd be a tough fight for Brian Stan. It's not,
Both guys, technically.
Yeah. Well, Munoz he's a high caliber wrestler, so I would imagine he wouldn't struggle too much putting Stan on his back. But yeah, as for Bisping, I think, like you said, I'll mention later, we'll talk about it more when we discuss the main event, but I don't think that loss of Jones hurt Belfort in any way, so I think Belfort dropping down to middleweight would be a great matchup against Bisping, thank you. Pulling a blank there. Against Bisping. And, yeah, I mean, I could see, I think, like you said, Weidman's has a little bit more momentum going into the Boach fight. Should he win, I think he's definitely deserving of a shot against Silva, give or take how he wins. But Boach, Boach gives a good fight. I guess, yeah, you would want to match up, a winner versus a winner. But Boach should be right there in the mix for a fight with Stan or, maybe Bisping. So we'll see what happens with how those fights unfold. Because like you said, who knows how long Silva's going to be on the shelf should he, the GSP Silva matchup happen. So, middleweight division's definitely got a lot of options here to go with, a lot of talent.
And you can't really look past Stephan Bonner. Well, except you totally can. But, it definitely, just the outcome of that fight matters too. I mean, at the end of the day, even if you think that he's going to get blasted still. But moving on, the co-main event saw Demetrius Johnson and Joseph Benavidez put on a clinic of basically speed, footwork, especially in Johnson's case, and some back-and-forth scrambles. Made for an entertaining fight. I totally agree with Dana White saying that if you booed that fight, you shouldn't be a fan of MMA because, it just means you're not into the lighter guys, which is fine. You can reserve your right to have an opinion, but you're not a true fighting fan if you don't at least appreciate every weight class. And an entertaining decision, honestly, I'm always okay with that. I was a little bit, I'll admit that I'm wrong. I thought Benavidez was going to be prepared for it. I honestly think he comes from a better camp. I think he's a better fighter still. I do. I think that Johnson's speed and footwork is what won him the fight. I don't think that he really, damaged Benavidez a whole lot other than some cuts. I think that Benavidez could theoretically adjust his game plan and still beat Johnson. And the most decisive round was the one that Benavidez won, right? So,
yeah, in this fight, I can't remember a moment where Johnson had Benavidez in trouble at all. But in the fourth round, Benavidez came so close to landing a guillotine choke on Mighty Mouse and ending this fight. I mentioned in the predictions, we both had Benavidez winning this. I actually had Benavidez winning by submission. And it was close there, but, Johnson's, like you mentioned, man, the guy just knows how to score points and win fights in the eyes of the judges. A little bit surprised this went to a split decision. It was a close fight. And
I had it 3-2 for Johnson.
Yeah. So I don't know. I was kind of surprised it wasn't a unanimous. I'd be kind of curious what rounds the judge gave Benavidez. But yeah, it was a close fight, and like you mentioned, fans booing it. Not too cool, but maybe all I can think is, when you're in attendance, these guys are moving so fast, you're kind of in a sense, missing the action. And these guys also, they're not heavyweights. So the punches they're throwing aren't, the big haymaker. I mean, although Benavidez was throwing some pretty good, haymaker overhand rights, when they connect, it doesn't, probably doesn't seem all that powerful or exciting, So given that, I mean, maybe it might be different when you're watching it there live, but yeah, on the TV, watching it, great fight, action-packed, fast. Both guys are, I mean, Joe Rogan throughout the whole while broadcasting the fight kept, he brought up the good point that, these small guys are usually always training with the bigger guys and, eventually go on to whatever they're doing, defeat the bigger guys. And it's because these guys master the technique. And to make up for their size disadvantages in training, they really developed the technique. So we saw very little mistakes in this fight, and that's what really made this an awesome matchup. And Mighty Mouse definitely landed more shots. Definitely seemed like the faster fighter out there. I think if these guys fought again, Benavidez would approach things a little bit differently, maybe, but not underrate Mighty Mouse's speed, which was clearly an advantage in this fight.
Oh, he's the fastest guy in the sport, I think.
Oh yeah, hands down. I mean, the guy's lightning.
Yeah, I got to give him that credit where credit's due.
Yeah, so I mean, all around, great come-in event, good title fight. I think Mighty Mouse is definitely a deserving champion, and I think he, after going through and beating Uncle Creepy, tough matchup there, and then beating Joseph Benavidez. I mean, you could definitely say he's in there. I mean, definitely, I would consider Mighty Mouse, a top pound-for-pound fighter right there at the top 10.
I'd put him at the bottom of the top 10, but yeah, he's on there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, flyweight's not deep enough for him to really say that yet, but the fact that he did have some good success at the weight above shows that I think I would rank him maybe after his next fight, the low end of the top 10. I think he's in the top 15 pound for pound right now. With that being said, fights to make next time. Johnson, they already said it. He's going to fight the winner of the Ultimate Fighter winner, Diego Brandao, versus former number 1 flyweight in the world, the debuting Hussier da Silva, which is actually the guy who was majorly upset by Ian McCall, who then took the number 1 ranking. Winner of that fight, I mean, don't sleep on Hussier da Silva. I know everybody knows Diego Brandao from the Ultimate Fighter, but
Brandao, that was featherweight, correct? He's dropping down, or I mean, bantamweight, correct? And then he's dropping down.
He was bantam, now he's fly.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I missed that season, so I'm not too familiar with them. But
so I'm not gonna waste any time saying other fantasy matchups. There are other names to be thrown in contention too, for sure. But that's the next fight for Johnson. So let's leave it at that. Benavidez. I mean, this is an instance. Why not book the clear cut number 2 guy against the number 3 guy, Benavidez and McCall? I think that fight makes sense. Although I could see the UFC wanting to create 2 separate contenders to kind of make options in case a fight falls through. So I could see. I forgot the name of the fighter that Benavidez beat in order to get the title shot. It was an Asian fighter, the top-ranked guy. I could see booking McCall against that fighter and then booking Benavidez against the loser of Brandao and Hussier da Silva. I think that those 2 fights make a lot of sense right there.
Let me try and pronounce it, because I did miss the fight. So, Yasuhiro Urashitanani. Ushitani. Benavidez beat him by TKO in the second round. So.
Yeah, Yasuhiro Urashitani.
Yeah.
Again, another top fighter right there. So I think those are the fights to make, actually. That way you don't kill one of the contenders, because if Joseph Benavidez beats McCall immediately, I don't know that everybody's ready for Benavidez Johnson 2 immediately. I don't know that Benavidez could even make the necessary adjustments to his game. So I'm going to say my first pick was dumb and go ahead and go with Benavidez versus the loser of Brandao and Hussier da Silva, and McCall against the Yoshihiro.
Ura from something.
Yeah, Urikatani.
Yeah. But
so, anyways, the complicated Asian named guy.
Yeah.
But again, flyweights for me is can't miss action. So
yeah, and I'm hoping they go out and they add some talent. It's a fresh division, and I know there's definitely flyweight talent out there. It's just, I mean, they haven't gotten a whole lot of recognition because not a lot of, this is like the first I mean, UFC is the biggest of them all, but outside the UFC, there have been a whole lot of promotions that have embraced the flyweight division to the point where, flyweights are getting some name recognition and
formerly
title.
it was Tachi Palace Fights that did. That was actually the number one, I think, before this. Right before we get to the main event, I just want to pull out some other notables on the card. Vinny
Magalhaes.
Defeated Igor Pokrayets, Krokop's protege, via armbar.
That was a smooth submission.
Very good transition. I think that, I'm not on the Vinny hype train yet necessarily. I mean, I like the guy. He looked good in this fight. Pokrayets, interestingly enough, said afterwards, I was in there for a fight, a war. If I wanted to do a jiu-jitsu match, I'd go compete in grappling. But, I think he kind of stuck his foot in his mouth there. He's a little bit of a sore loser. I don't think he actually believes that, especially because he was the one who initiated the takedown, so that is retarded.
This is mixed martial arts, buddy.
Mixed.
But yeah, Magalhaes definitely looking improved from his last
UFC stint.
Yeah, and I know he went on a, I believe, 4-0 run outside the UFC, including a title. He won a title in an outside promotion.
M1 Global.
M1, yeah. So definitely improved, and, his stand-up was his weakness, but, he's working on that, and his jiu-jitsu is world-class. So definitely, I think a good addition re-addition to the UFC.
Oh, absolutely. I think you book him next against the loser of Glover Teixeira and Fabio Maldonado. And then I think, fight of the night, have to mention that, TJ Grant versus Evan Dunham, a bloody war. This is one you got to watch now. Same with the Vinny fight. You got to watch it now. That was, short and sweet. The TJ Grant, Evan Dunham fight was a war that can't be missed. And I agree with the fight of the night ruling 100%. TJ Grant, there's a lot of options at lightweight to book him against. It really just depends on which direction you want to go.
A little bit of a surprising win, man. I mean, Evan Dunham, last year was right there in contention for the title, top of the division. A couple tough losses and an injury has really dropped him off the face of the division. But TJ Grant and Dunham, a war. One of those wars where, Dunham kept sticking out his tongue, smiling. So one of those kind of wars where you got Joe Rogan in the back, Joe Rogan in the background just cracking up saying, "This is crazy, man. This is crazy." Yeah, so Dunham, it was one of those kind of fight of the nights.
Yeah, Dunham not the smartest tool in the shed. He's proved that in all of his losses. I think that's his undoing. It's not his skill set. It's the fact that he's kind of fucking dumb, actually. You kind of hear it in how he talks afterwards. He just randomly yells, "I love this sport," after some of his fights. He's kind of one of those just, I don't think he's a farm boy technically, but he just seems like one of those dumb farm boys who just, all he knows how to do is fight. So I like watching him fight still. With that being said, I don't know that he'll ever be a contender now that I know what I know about him, but I think he's a great measuring stick in that division. He is to the lightweight division, kind of what like Mike Pyle does as well. So let's move on. And now that you mentioned those, the main event saw the champion, John Jones, defend his light heavyweight title against a bloated-up middleweight, Vitor Belfort, in what turned out to be kind of a lot longer fight than a lot of people would have thought.
Oh, yeah. I thought Vitor would be lucky if he got out of the first round. I picked this fight to end in the second round. It ends up going to the fourth round. Belfort, man, showed how tough he was and really gave John Jones the biggest scare of his career. And that was, first round, caught Jones in a deep, deep armbar. And, Jones after the fight said that he wasn't going to tap, that he was going to let his arm break if that was what was going to happen. And technically, I don't think they've officially released what exactly is wrong, but, Belfort mentioned that he could feel it cracking, and Jones mentioned he could feel it, cracking. And, something that I mentioned, or it was mentioned that, John might have some nerve damage in his bicep. And, I think his elbow is pretty messed up. So, kudos for him for not tapping. You got to give some respect for that. But, Belfort, man, I didn't think that he was going to do much off of his back. He really looked good tonight this weekend using his jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, two things that I want to note. Even though I don't like John Jones, I got to give him credit. That looked really painful. That was probably the most, the highest showing of guts from an armbar, refusal to tap since Royce Gracie's refusal to tap against Matt Hughes. And I think, that's one of those cases, you look at I'm not saying the ref was irresponsible, but you look at a case where like Frank Mir broke Tim Sylvia's arm.
Got to throw Nogueira out there also.
Yeah.
Nogueira Mir getting his arm broken.
Yeah. You get a ref that like looks and is really close at the action. A different ref could have stopped that fight, or the same ref maybe with a better eye on it. So
yeah, you got the best in the business in there. Big John McCarthy. It's good seeing him back in the UFC.
It is, yeah. It's good seeing Big John as always. Big John, I actually don't think is the best ref in the business. I think Herb Dean is the best ref for my money. I think Big John has done the most for the sport, and I think that he's right up there. It's like a combination. It's like a contest between an A+ and an A. I'll take either ref any day. Shortly thereafter, I'd probably rank Josh Rosenthal or Mario Finish Him Yamasaki. But anyways, with that being said, I got to give John Jones props. Got to give him credit for that. And if it was loud enough for Belfort to hear the pops, a ref could have easily stopped it. And if I was a judge, since those elbows from John Jones, he controlled Belfort most of the rest of the round, and he cut him. He didn't really come close to knocking him out at all, especially because Belfort has a granite chin. But I gave Belfort that round. I mean, you come that close to finishing it, to me, that's just the same as dropping a guy and almost knocking him out. You got to give Belfort that round, just like Machida.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, in a way, that ultimate it was kind of a weird. I know Belfort mentioned after the fight that he did have some injuries in training, and so he wasn't 100% for this fight.
The rumors that he actually had a broken hand or a separated shoulder, which are both terrible injuries to have.
Yeah. Which would, explain partially his strategy for pulling guard, which is kind of an interesting, to have Jones in your guard raining down elbows, and then you get up and you get out of it, and then, you do the same thing. You pull guard again to go right back in that same position. I mean, yeah, he had some success with the arm bar, almost slapped on a triangle right at the end of a round, but, he was getting beat up with, Jones sitting in his guard. And
yeah, absolutely. I remember now. It was either a broken hand or I think it was a fractured rib, which makes sense as to why Belfort dropped down when he got a side kick. When I was watching the fight, I thought he got the wind knocked out of him or Jones broke a rib right there. But I think what happened was he hit a pre-existing injury, and that's why Belfort kind of just dropped to his back for a little bit to recover, and why Jones followed him into his guard so quickly. I think that, the rest of the fight, it was pretty much like a lot of ground and pound. I think the fact that, whether it was a hand injury or a rib injury, that pretty much explains a lot of why we didn't really see any of the classic Belfort flurry. And also, you got to give props to Jones for fighting the smartest fight. Instead of testing his mettle and standing up with Belfort right away, if you notice what he did was he took him down immediately, because Belfort would have absolutely not had the time to add the proper amount of muscle the right way. So his muscles are susceptible to kind of being built up with a lot of lactic acid and blood over a sustained period of time. So Jones and Greg Jackson's actually done this when you saw GSP defeat BJ Penn the second time. He really just kind of laid, if you notice, really high in Jones' guard and kind of made him kind of carry his weight with his arms and shoulders. And so, when I've had it happen to me before, when your arms and shoulders are that filled with blood, it's amazingly hard to punch. So I don't know if John Jones really knew about the injuries necessarily, but he fought a fight to where he essentially made Belfort carry his weight so he couldn't have as fast a punches the rest of the fight. So I think a combination of the injury and that made Belfort's hands really, not that scary.
Yeah, but with that being said, man, I thought Belfort looked, I think he's given Jones one of his tougher fights, definitely in the division. I said last week that I thought, Stephan Bonner gave him a tough fight, but I think with that arm bar and, he did land some good shots standing. He was able to get inside and they had a couple decent exchanges. But I thought overall, man, Belfort stepping up on short notice. I said I thought that Belfort really needed to take this fight to Jones. And unlike his Silva fight, he looked a little bit tentative and respected, Silva a little too much. I could definitely see, Belfort fighting with that old school spirit and that, let's just give this guy hell. I'm here to fight. I think that's exactly what Vitor brought, was a fight.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of the fans, most of the fans, I think, just about anybody who kind of knows about the whole John Jones debacle was rooting for Belfort. And, I have to agree with you. Other than maybe Machida, I think Belfort probably gave Jones his biggest fight, the biggest test to date, actually. And you got to throw in Bonner there. But again, that's when Jones is a lot more inexperienced and he kind of gassed in the last round. So of those three guys, I probably would like to see Bonner fight Jones again the least, unless he beats Silva.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah. But, unless he... Yeah, that'd be kind of crazy to beat Silva and then, right back in there for a rematch. Because a lot of people forget, Jones fought Bonner when he was up and coming, and
you see it on the highlights. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You get reminded of it every time with the spinning elbows and judo tosses.
But it's actually one of the more we got to see a little bit more of Jones' stand up, and what because we haven't really seen anyone lately make a war out of a fight with John Jones. Either John Jones taking him down, beating him up, or John Jones utilizing his reach, and a lot of that you can credit Greg Jackson really helping to create these game plans, and Jones going in, analyzing his opponents. But the fight with Bonner really showed what Jones can do when he's in a brawl. And,
yes, definitely.
Yeah,
I think too. One thing to note is that I'm gonna actually link on the page. Watch for this, guys. Jack Slack over at BloodyElbow.com is an excellent combat sports analyst. He's coming out with a book that's essentially about fights gone by, I think it's the name of it, and it's just analyzing, the techniques of the greats, and he can see to, inside a fight like nobody's business. It's like he puts a microscope on it, to use kind of a metaphor. But he actually wrote a great piece called Killing the King, and he's touched on some of the points from John Jones, some that I already knew that I mentioned last time, some that I haven't. That I didn't, at least until I read that, so we will post that. But, one thing that Belfort definitely showed that you can add to that list is the fact that Jones gets careless when he's on top of guys because he's so used to dominating them. So his jiu-jitsu, although it's competent, is not at the level where it needs to be. It's just that there's not a lot of guys at light heavyweight who have excellent jiu-jitsu that they use.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I know Jones mentioned in the post-fight conference was that, he doesn't really train that much on his jiu-jitsu. And he acknowledged that, and he said, I'm going to go back, I'm going to work on it, because it definitely, at least his jiu-jitsu defense, he has, I think that was his sixth submission victory in I think it tied the record in the division, in terms of tied or broke, but he's got now 6 submission victories. I was just going to comment too, just on the warrior spirit of John Jones. A lot of people give him, he's kind of, gotten some heat lately, but after this fight, this is exactly what he needed to help his image, and was to pull through, and that showed true warrior spirit. Depending on what this injury is, fighting through that, really not showing any signs of having the injury. He was still throwing right hands, not as much or as frequently, but then to go on and get a submission, an Americana on Belfort, where you got to use both your arms and stuff, and strength is, that's a muscle submission.
It's a muscle. That's a big guy submission.
Yeah, and so to power through and to finish by submission, I think this is exactly what Jones needed to rebound, to get people to forget about his DUI, to get people to forget about the cancellation. I know there's a lot of interviews with him leading up to the fight, and he came across as a professional. And, it was a bad situation, the canceling, and, we don't really know what Dana exactly said to him and what he exactly said to Dana, and, but I think this fight was exactly what Jones needed, and I think it was a win-win for both the fighters. This definitely did not hurt Belfort in any shape or form. Like you said, I think he could drop right back down to middleweight, and, I think, like you mentioned, great fight with Bisping. That would be, I think a good stand-up battle, and, Belfort definitely has the power in his hands to take it to Bisping, and, who knows, we could be seeing Belfort once again challenging for a title soon. And, maybe a rematch with Anderson Silva. Try that again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's actually, we agreed on all our predictions, so I think that I not entirely, but half disagree with you on how the fight's viewed. That way we at least have a little bit more interesting commentary on it. I think there's 2 ways to look at this fight. There's media image fight, which is what you touched on. In the media image, Jones looks better. He was in an entertaining fight on a stacked pay-per-view card, and he showed some guts. He showed some will. He showed some character. He showed some respect to Belfort, and it wasn't ridiculously over the top and fake like it was when he fought Rashad. So I think John Jones, the person and the character, looked excellent. And as a fighter, Belfort, I think, was underrated at this too, so I think he looked better. But from the other perspective, and this is the perspective of other fighters in his division, I think this fight was excellent for them. I think it was a confidence booster. That armbar, that's the most talked about thing with this fight afterwards. And on top of that, the fact that you have a bloated up middleweight who took the fight on a couple weeks' notice, who wasn't previously training for an upcoming fight. The fact that you have all those factors in one, has to bolster the confidence of guys like Alexander Gustafsson, and the rest of the division too. Machida for a second fight, Dan Henderson even, and theoretically a Shogun rematch could always happen. Although I don't really whatever, that's a separate conversation. But yeah, I think that from that perspective, Jones didn't look as good to the rest of his peers. We already know Jones' next fight, is either going to be against Machida or Dan Henderson. You do have the Shogun Gustafsson fight, though, so if Dana White does make Dan Henderson and Lyoto fight first, you could easily see, because the fight's going to happen first, the winner of Shogun Gustafsson get a title shot, depending on how the fight goes. So
yeah, and who knows how long Jones will be on the shelf. So I'm kind of curious to see what the full analysis is of this injury, and how much this really does affect John Jones and how long he's out for. Because like you mentioned, there is a lot of matchups with Dan Henderson coming back, and it will be looking for a fight.
Dan Henderson, yeah.
Henderson, Gustafsson fight, Shogun. Rampage is looking for his final fight. Winner of Glover Teixeira wins his fight, he's going to be right up there. So, some interesting matchups, and there's really not a whole lot of like a clear cut, contender. And I think Machida definitely missed out on his opportunity. I definitely see Machida now needing one or two fights to at least another fight. I don't think they're going to give him a shot at Jones before Henderson, or depending on when Henderson's ready. But I definitely think Machida missed out on his opportunity, and depending on how long Jones is out, we could definitely see a whole lot of the whole division, mixed and matched again.
Get some clarity for sure, depending on how bad the injury is. And I think that, this is, again, I'll say it, this is the UFC's probably most shallow division right now as far as actual title contenders go. Yeah, they have a solid amount of light heavyweights, but you have a lot of B-level and C-level guys. You don't really have very many A-level guys, and you have even less A-level guys that Jones hasn't fought already. It definitely is their most shallow division, but it looks a little bit better, actually, after this fight. Like, the division has a little bit of shining promise. Compared to how it used to be, especially if Dan Henderson was going to fight John Jones. And again, another reason I think that his peers should be confident is one thing I noticed was that every time Belfort did hit Jones, he kind of looked like he was blocking, like he hated being hit, putting his hands up, like he was just trying to get out of there, like a, flicking water on a cat kind of. But yeah, and I think Belfort's next fight, we already touched on it. I think it should be Bisping. It depends on whether Joe Silva books him like a winner at middleweight or a loser. If he books him like a loser, he could fight Mark Munoz. If he books him against a winner, it could be Bisping.
Just to close on this matchup, I'm kind of curious to get your take on this and your opinion. But what do you take of John Jones? He's done this the last couple of fights. Right out of the beginning, coming out and crawling towards his opponent. We saw a little interesting engage where he did have, he was crawling towards Belfort, and Belfort just, threw a high kick at his, technically he's a downed opponent, and then you got Big John McCarthy yelling out something like, hey, if you're going to play games like that, you're going to get it, sort of thing. I forget exactly what McCarthy said, but he was implying like, hey, you're going to pull that, then, I'm going to let this guy kick you in the head. Like, you deserve it almost. So it's weird with the guy that's kind of, all about, trying to be respectful, and it's just a weird,
It just goes to show you that John Jones rubs people in his within the sport the wrong way too, because we have Big John, who's like the definition of consummate professional, and he's pissed off enough to where he's letting a pretty serious rule go potentially by the wayside, just because he is fed up with John Jones' personality. And it's also one of those things too. Jones starting the fight like that, I just look at it as kind of like dumb taunting and didn't really care, but it's actually it's almost cheap, because if you're starting from a 3-point stance and jump up all of a sudden, you're right there. So I think that it's kind of not the same as being like on all fours and defending and getting a kick. It's, you're doing that to yourself essentially, and I think Big John caught on to that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any strategy towards it. I'm trying to remember his past fights too. I feel like there was
Rampage, he did it.
Yeah, there was another awkward engage in one of his prior fights because of it. I can't remember which one exactly, but I don't get why he does it. And from a guy that's all about game plans and strategy and respect and doing whatnot, I gotta imagine in the back of his mind he's trying to use it for something. Whether it be, you said you can walk pretty much right up to your opponent when you do that without risking taking a knee. Really, your opponent can only punch you. And
you essentially change levels for the takedown already too, if you want.
Yeah.
Look at it that way.
So, I guess if you're looking to take your opponent down right away, right there, that would be an interesting approach to get in close and, I don't know. It's kind of, I side on it being a little bit disrespectful And it's just when you hear the referee say, "Okay, let's get it on, fight," you want to see the guys go, toe to toe. This is a weird way to come out. And like I said, I'd side with it being a little bit disrespectful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's just another list of the ways that Jones kind of is annoying, and I don't think he's a bad guy at the end of the day. I think he has a good heart. But if there's a decision to make and it's one way, is a clear-cut way to make you look good, one way is a clear-cut way to make you look bad, it just goes to show you Jones is going to pick the worst one, even if it's technically not something that determines whether he is black or white, good or bad at the end of the day as far as his character goes. But as far as just kind of how he rubs people, it's always going to be the wrong way, I feel like.
Yeah, so that's our recap for UFC 152. Like we mentioned before, great night of fights. It was a good bounce back from having a cancellation, so definitely some solid fights. And you got UFC 153 right around the corner with a couple other cards. I think
fight nights sandwiched in between.
Yeah, so a lot of fights coming up. So we're going to go on to our UFC on Fuel. Miocic against Struve, or Struve versus Miocic, either way.
Is it Miocic or Sick?
I think it's Miocic, but you probably pronounce it either way. I don't know. Miocic. I've heard it both ways. But yeah. So there's not a whole lot of fights to really go into too far in depth on. Good matchups. Going to be some good fights, definitely.
You can't argue with the price.
Oh yeah. If you get Fuel, I don't give Fuel. They need to, Comcast needs to get on it. But yeah. So, just starting off, there's 6 fights being broadcasted on Fuel. The rest of the prelims will be on Facebook. So, it could be a full day of fights if you choose, and all free. So, starting off the first fight, Che Mills against Dwayne Bang Ludwig. Ludwig coming off a loss to Dan Hardy,
who ironically is co-headlining the card.
Yeah.
Che Mills coming off a tough loss to Rory McDonald, where he looked a little sharp early, but then kind of got controlled, dominated, bloodied, en route to a stoppage win. Che Mills is a really highly touted prospect. I see this fight playing out similar to Ludwig and Hardy. Ludwig is definitely the better technical striker, but he's been in a lot of wars. He's fought in professional kickboxing. His chin just isn't what it used to be, although it's still okay. I see Mills just kind of, this fight kind of going similar to Hardy and Ludwig, with Ludwig kind of looking solid early. He looks like the more technical, crisp guy, and then kind of a wayward, knee or elbow or left hook or something catches Ludwig, drops him for the TKO win inside the first round.
All right, well, I'm going to throw the opposite. I'm a fan of Ludwig. He always brings it. He's got the power in his hands to finish people.
Fastest knockout in UFC history.
Yep, 7 seconds.
4 seconds.
Oh yeah, that's right, 4 seconds. But yeah, I'm going to take Dwayne Bang Ludwig on this one. I think these guys are going to stand a trade, and I know you said Mills is the touted prospect, the younger of the fighter, but Ludwig's got the experience, and yeah, so Ludwig is coming off 2 losses: a submission loss to Josh Neer, and a KO loss to Dan Hardy. But yeah, I just see Ludwig bringing it, and I'm gonna say TKO. He's gonna finish this fight in I would say first round. We're gonna see a first round finish. I know Mills, this is gonna be in his home territory, so he's gonna be fired up, so he'll have the advantage there. But I'm gonna take Dwayne on this one and say first round TKO.
Ludwig has a lot of foreign fans too, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him get some cheers too and not booed. Mills, his nickname is Beautiful, very handsome guy, second coming of Sexy Yama, if you ask some people. But he's a British slugger, which means his striking is on point. His wrestling's pretty good for a Brit. I see him potentially even taking Ludwig down and ground pounding it. I just think he has more ways to win, and I think pretty good at multiple things beats really good at just one thing.
All right, so we disagree finally. Yeah, but finally. So we're gonna move on to the next fight. Lightweight matchup between Paul Sass and Matt Wyman. Paul Sass, he is undefeated in his career. He'll be fighting in his backyard also. He's from...
Yep. And you have Matt Wyman with another, appearance-related nickname in Handsome.
Yeah. And, Sass is 13-0 in his MMA career. He's 3-0 in the UFC with all 3 of his victories by submission, including a good win in his last fight against Jacob Volkman. And... But yeah, Matt Wyman, I've been very impressed with his improvements since the Ultimate Fighter show. And, you mentioned you got a beautiful on this card. You got a handsome also. So Matt, handsome, I think that's what he calls himself, Wyman. And, but yeah, I think this would be another good scrap. And I see both these guys, Matt Wyman's going to try and avoid the submissions and ground game. He's got fairly decent wrestling, coming off a good win against Mac Danzig, a decision victory. Yeah, I'm going to say this is, a brawl, and Matt Wyman avoids submissions, and I think Matt Wyman hands Paul Sass his first loss in the UFC. So I'm going to say Matt Wyman wins this one by unanimous decision.
I think I'm actually disagree with you again on this one. Wow, streak going. Paul Sass going to be in front of his hometown crowd. He's going to be fired up. I think Wyman's going to underrate him a little bit and think he can just, take the fight wherever he wants with his wrestling, which I think, since although Paul Sass is a submission expert, I think there's some sort of stigma about the fact that even if you're good at submissions, if you're not some jiu-jitsu ace or somebody like, a Frank Mir or something who has a lot of like a history of, very violent or instant submissions, I think that Matt Wyman's going to think he can take him down and just kind of dictate the fight that way. I think he could just as easily, I could be wrong, he could just as easily stand up with him, which would be the smarter thing to do, and try to outbox him. But I think that at least a little too often he throws caution to the wind, takes him down, and I think that he may win a round or two, but Sass eventually catches him, and I think he's going to actually catch him with either a guillotine choke or a triangle choke for the win in the second round.
Alrighty, so we disagree on 2. Cool. But yeah, moving on. Next fight, it's a bantamweight matchup between Brad Pickett and Yves Jabouin. Jabouin. Thank you. Yeah. So Yves Jabouin, and Yves Jabouin on a 3-fight win streak in the UFC, also a former WEC fighter, and Brad Pickett, he's fought the best in the division. It's like a solid fighter. And this is going to be another stand-up war, I think. A lot of great matchups just in terms of, just matching similar styles. And but, yeah, I think this is going to be a stand-up battle. Pickett, he's got some pretty decent hands, knockout power, and being in his own backyard. In England, I think he's going to take this one. I'd say he finishes Jabouin by, I'm going to say, first round TKO.
I totally agree. I think both guys are good. I think it could be fight of the night. But if you look at a lot of the losses in Jabouin's career, there are, it's easy to find some KOs in there, or there's a submission by strikes as well. Although he's pushing 34, I still see Brad Pickett as one of the top guys. I think that he actually gets a stoppage on this one too. I think Brad Pickett TKO, third round.
All right, next matchup is 2 guys from Britain. It's John Hathaway taking on John McGuire. John Hathaway, definitely one of the touted prospects in the division. Was really had quite a win streak and momentum going. Then lost a surprising fight to Mike Pyle, and since then he's won his last 2 fights. So he's kind of bounced back, but his last, let me see, 6 fights have all gone by way of decision. So he's seems to be lacking the finishing tenacity. But I think I've been impressed with Hathaway. He's a lengthy fighter for the division, and I think he takes this one. And McGuire has been in some brawls. He's 18-3 in his MMA career. He's on a 2-fight win streak in the UFC. Won his last fight by submission over Marcus Johnson. So, this will be a good matchup, I think. But I think Hathaway edges it out and wins by decision.
Totally agree. You touched on all the points I was going to say. John Hathaway, unanimous decision, because he's the more proven commodity of the 2.
Moving on to the co-main event, and what I think is a solid matchup. Should be entertaining. Dan Hardy taking on Amir Sadallah, Ultimate Fighter winner, but hasn't looked all that, impressive, I would say, overall as a, one of the weaker champions of the seasons. But but yeah, this is, these guys are going to stand. They're going to trade. And Amir hasn't really proven that he's really got any finishing power in his hands, so I don't really think Hardy has too much to worry about in terms of standing and trading. And I think Hardy's got, I wouldn't say Amir's got pretty technical striking, but I think Hardy's boxing will be the difference in this fight, and he's got the power in his hands. And I wouldn't be surprised if Hardy catches Sadala, and he was finished by TKO Sadala by Johnny Hendricks back at UFC 101, lost by TKO. That was in the first round. I wouldn't be surprised if Hardy catches him, finishes his fight. I'm going to take Dan Hardy by TKO in the second round.
Yeah, I think if you look at this fight, it comes down to just experience, and it comes down to who kind of folds more and who really is a little bit more proven. And although Hardy just has a one fight win streak and lost 4 before that, he seems like he learned a lesson from each of the 4. The fight with Condit, it was kind of totally a fluke thing. Condit, he was with the master of game planners, Greg Jackson. Hardy, the better boxer, was getting the better of the exchanges, and then Condit actually used a little teep kick to take Hardy essentially off of his power leg, which made his left hook get there less quickly and not as hard, thus giving thus giving Condit, a TKO win over Hardy. Against Johnson, he kind of was expecting a stand-up war. He kind of learned to expect the unexpected. Against Lytle, I think that he, just showed that in that fight he shouldn't have gone for the takedown, especially if he was kind of a little bit gassed himself. I know Hardy switched up his strength and conditioning routine for that fight, and it kind of showed. It seemed like he kind of was a little off and gassed, and he normally is known for having great cardio. I mean, you have to go 5 rounds of GSP. And then that's, speaking of which, his other losses to GSP, who's, the welterweight kingpin on another level than anybody else. You almost can't really count that as a loss. Whereas you have Sadala, and you look at his losses, and he's lost to a guy like Dwayne Ludwig, who, Hardy fairly easily beat. To use a little bit of MMA math there. And I know styles make fights, but still, he's lost to Don Hyun Kim. He doesn't really fight at all like Hardy, so you can't use that. And he's lost to Hendricks, TKO, in a fashion similar to the way Hardy could beat him. So, Sadala, I'd rank him kind of, I like the guy a lot, and I think he has a place in the sport, but it's probably more as an interviewer once he's done. I rank him around there with like a Mac Danzig for one of the worst Ultimate Fighter winners. I think if it wasn't for his personality, he'd personally be cut from the company. He does have some entertaining wins, though, it was DeMarcus Johnson, I believe, which is an awesome win there. But, his boxing is worse than Hardy's. His striking is worse than Hardy's. He has less power than Hardy's. His chin's worse than Hardy's. His submission offense, at least, is better than Hardy's, but I don't think Hardy is going to get caught. I don't think Hardy didn't get submitted by George St. Pierre in those submissions. I don't think he's going to get submitted by Sadala. Sadala is not as good of a, submission artist as Chris Lytle either. I think on paper, Hardy wins this fight, at least 8 out of 10 times, and I see no smart reason why to pick the upset in Sadala. So I'm going to go with Dan Hardy with, I'm going to say unanimous decision. I think Sadala's chin's pretty solid, and I think he guts it out.
Alrighty. So then, moving on to the main event, in what I think it should be a solid matchup, Stefan Struve taking on Stipe Miocic. Stefan Struve, since getting knocked out by Travis Brown, has looked good in his last 3 fights. He's got 2 submission victories, which is his strength. He is a jiu-jitsu expert, and he's got victories over Pat Barry, Dave Herman, and LeVar Johnson in his last 3 fights. Submitted Pat Barry and LeVar Johnson. And, Stipe Miocic, definitely up-and-coming talent, undefeated in his MMA career. He's 2-0 or 3-0 in the UFC. With an impressive victory, I would say, in his last fight against a game Shane Del Rosario. Really, Shane Del Rosario brought that fight to him in the first round, but Rosario had been out for a long while leading up to that fight. So definitely, I think, just being out of the cage definitely caught up to him in that fight. And but yeah, Miocic definitely has got the power in his hands. Struve is going to want to get this fight on the ground. We haven't really seen Miocic on his back or on the ground for really any of his fights. And that's where Struve should have an advantage, especially with his length and his size. He can slap on triangles, arm bars, just all around. Just for his size and in the vision, he's definitely got some of the best jiu-jitsu. And but he doesn't really have the background for taking this fight to the ground. He doesn't really have the wrestling. He just kind of uses his size and the ability to trip his opponents to take him down, and kind of pulls guard occasionally. But yeah, we've also seen Struve in some brawls, and this is what Miocic is going to want to do, is to turn this fight into a brawl, and where Struve's chin has definitely been tested and is a little bit questionable. He's had some brutal knockouts in his career.
Although in his defense, it's all the guys who hit like Mack trucks, though. Travis Brown, Roy Nelson, and Junior Dos Santos.
True. So, but Miocic definitely can pack the power, and I see the Miocic keeping this fight standing, and stopping any sort of takedowns if Struve indeed attempts to try and take this fight down. But I just see this being a slugfest on the feet, where I'd give the power and finishing advantage to Miocic. I think if Miocic lands one of his power shots on Struve, you can definitely see Struve crumple and go down. So I'm gonna pick Stipe in this fight, and I think it could definitely turn into a brawl. Like I said, looking forward to this fight. It's actually quite a solid matchup, in my opinion. Should make for a good fight. And Struve is usually always in entertaining fights. I haven't really ever seen him in a boring one. Whether even if he's getting knocked out in the first round brutally, at least he somehow provides a highlight. But yeah, anyway,
his 4 fight of the night bonuses to his name.
Yeah, so guy's an exciting fighter, so I don't expect anything different in this fight. And Miocic's going to bring it to him. So I'm taking Stipe to win this fight by, I'll say TKO in the second round.
I'm really torn on this fight. I think Stipe is the real deal, even though he's a little bit untested, which actually makes me think that that's kind of making me hesitant a bit and want to pick Struve. I do think that Stipe has more potential than Struve, because it seems like just yesterday that Junior Dos Santos welcomed Struve to the UFC, quite brutally, I might add. But Struve hasn't really evolved enough. He's the type of guy who really needs to look at John Jones' playbook for how to fight. He needs to look at Semi Schilt's playbook, probably even more so, for how to fight with success. But he always seems to get suckered into fighting at close range in these brawls. I think he uses his submissions well, but his striking really should look a lot different than it does. And he hasn't shown a lot to really prove otherwise. Against Dave Herman, I was surprised to see him get the TKO. I thought, Herman is the better striker. I thought he was going to do that, but I think that just came down to the fact that Herman doesn't train MMA full-time even yet. Against Pat Barry, obviously he was the worst striker, but he ended up kind of suckering Barry into getting submitted on that one because he pulled guard. And everybody else that he's beat with striking, or who is a striker, is a decidedly worse striker, except for maybe Paul Buentello. Some people think that decision should have gone to Paul anyways. But, part of me wants to pick Struve because he's been in there again and tested against a lot better competition. He's fought Junior Dos Santos, Paul Buentello, Roy Nelson, Travis Brown, Pat Barry, Dave Herman, and, to compare Stipe on that list, as of right now in his career, he's probably Dave Herman, and that's, of those guys I named, he's probably the second worst guy on that list, right before Pat Barry. So it's really hard to say. But I just have a gut feeling about Stipe being legit. I know that he can weather a storm too, and that's what Struve's known for as well. I think that Stipe, I think he's a protege of Krokop, kind of like Pokrajec. I think that he is going to be the real deal, and so I just have a gut feeling, going a little against logic here, that he's going to TKO Stefan Struve within 2 rounds.
Alrighty, so we agree and we disagree. So excited to see how the matchups unfold. But yeah, thanks for listening. If you're still tuning in, we're just a little bit over an hour, and that's our UFC 152 recap and our UFC on Fuel predictions. We'll be back next week. Probably do a quick rundown on some of the Fuel fights, and I know we got some other fights coming up, so we might have some more predictions for you. So we'll see what the schedule holds. So, yeah, once again, thanks for listening. If you're still tuning in, not the ideal platform on YouTube, but working on some other things. So everything's in the works, and definitely a lot of room to improve, but that is our show for this week. So thanks for listening if you're still listening. And Matt, any closing thoughts? Anything?
One thing I didn't get to add earlier, I just want to wish Gilbert Melendez speedy recovery. I know Gil. I know his dad. He's a nice guy. He's part of the Scrap Pack, which my coach is involved with, although not as heavily. And, best of wishes to him. And I know how much that fight meant to him, so I really hope the quickest recovery for him possible. And thanks for joining us, guys. I'm really excited about next week's show. As always, we'll be doing a recap. And then also, pretty soon, we're going to be doing a prediction show for Brown versus Bigfoot. So stay with us. It's an exciting time to be an MMA fan, and, why not join us in watching the sport grow?
Indeed. All right. That is our show. Peace.